Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Garuda podcast. Today, the guest that I have with me is Professor Gautam Desiraju, and the book is called India Science, Politics, and Geostrategy. Professor Desiraju has been one of India's pioneering scientists, one of the most cited scientists that India has produced. But this book in particular is not just about science, but about a whole variety range of topic that displays Professor Desiraju's strategic thinking and depth of thought in so many areas. So, without much ado, let me welcome him. Welcome, Professor Desiraju. Namaste.
Good evening, Sankrant. Very happy to be talking to you about my new book, India Science, Politics, Geostrategy, which has been published by Garuda Prakashan in a record time. And I thank you for all the cooperation extended to me by Garuda Prakashan and yourself. And looking
Absolutely.
forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. When I was reading the book and also noting the wide range of essays that you had written on, coming from a technology background, I was certainly finding a lot of resonance in my own career path and in my own way of approaching many of these topics because I also came from a technology background and then started writing and delving into many areas. So I'd like to learn from you what prompted you to firstly write those essays and to bring this book about as a scientist who's delving far from your field in a way.
Well, I started writing about 30 years ago, which is why the subtitle of this book is A 30-Year Thought Journey. And it was in the early 90s, and I had completed about 12, 13 years as an independent researcher in the University of Hyderabad, and I had been promoted to full professor. So at this time, I started looking around because the hurly-burly of writing papers and appearing before selection committees and seeking promotions was over. And coincidentally, at that time, this was the era of the Mandal Commission recommendations being accepted, and sudden presence of large number of OBC students in the classrooms, and this was a major change in the academic institutions. I was in the University of Hyderabad, and so as a teacher, we had to consider this whole business of reservations. Ironically, years later, we are revisiting these discussions again with respect to the general category students, which has now become a very hot political topic now. But when Mandal came and the students came, my interest went into the political matters because these particular political matters were concerning the academic community directly. Also, the unsettled political situation in our country in the 1990s, full of these coalition governments, also made me start thinking about the politics and why it seemed that coalition government seemed to be almost the only choice that the electorate was throwing up each time. And I knew very little about I mean, electoral politics till then. I mean, I would go and vote, but I think that was more of a routine thing that I was doing. But thinking about stuff like first past the post and what things like what is a republic, what is a democracy, these I started getting interested in this kind of thing. So my early articles had more to do with actually science and how the new political dispensations were treating science. And from a very early stage in the middle 90s, I was thinking about this whole business of merit, which has come back again now in full focus in the last 10 days. And the debate between excellence and equity. This is something that we were told constantly in the university in the 1990s, that we teachers would have to consider our teaching responsibilities in such a manner that both excellence and equity were going to be optimized simultaneously. This was the question of the 1990s. And gradually, I will say, it was only around, I was writing lots of short pieces, mostly to do with science and the way it affected politics. The writings became more political in color after 2004, when the UPA government was voted in. And in 2007, I wrote a major article in Economic and Political Weekly, where more or less I was coming down to the conclusion that within the university system, excellence and equity could not go together. And this has only become more and more of a conviction. And the selection of the articles which have appeared in this India Science Politics Geostrategy book firmly reinforce my belief that excellence and equity cannot go together. You can either have one or you can have the other, but you cannot have both. Once again, I
Absolutely.
will draw the attention of the listener to the present political crisis, which is all about the reservations or the lack of reservations for the GC community. Now, as it went along, the political issues gradually became geostrategic issues because I was also getting convinced by about 2010, 2011, and so on, that unless we had a very, very high level of scientific and technological superiority, we would not be able to have geostrategic clout. In other words, soft power must come only after hard power. And hard power you can only get when you have very high quality science. I am also convinced that very high quality science is only possible today in a merit oriented system. In other words, no equity, only excellence. Because without this, you cannot get the kind of heft that you need for a geostrategic bargaining and leverage. So, the 30-year thought journey, which is covered in the book, naturally flowed from science into politics in the way in which it influenced science, and then the fact that you need very good science to have a geostrategic cloud. So, this is a book written by a scientist from a scientific viewpoint, and I think logically argues that if we want to become a major power by 2050, 2070, if we want to become, that is the assumption, if we want to become, it must go only towards excellence, and we must completely scrap our flirtations with equity, because this is not going to take us anywhere in any reasonable time frame. And in fact, if you look at the discussions happening in social media again in the last 1 week, it is almost guaranteed to take us down, not even to maintain some sort of a linear or steady progress. It will actually take us down. And so I think that the reader will find in this book my natural thought progression, which I dare say may be the thought progression of many intelligent and well considered people who don't wish to take any strong political line this way or that way. Because, in my way of thinking, the political parties merely come and go. And if a political party is going to be successful, well, they will be the ones who reflect the mood of the people correctly. So I am not, in that sense, particularly wedded to this or that political position, but I would like to see our country get into this first or second position in the world by 2050, and certainly in absolute terms by 2075, so that we don't have to go to PPP at that stage. But in absolute terms, I would like to see India, which I would call Bharat at that stage, uh, becoming the top nation in the world by 2075, about 50 years from now. And the book, I think, reflects some of my thoughts, hopes, and aspirations.
Absolutely. As I said, there's a range of essays in the book. Highly recommend people to pick up a copy. India Science, Politics, Geostrategy by Professor Desiraju. Coming back to this whole UGC and equity versus excellence issue, I actually just coincidentally earlier today published an article in News 18,
I saw that.
which is exactly on this topic around the problem in India, especially if I compare with what China has done, is definitely one of excellence. And unfortunately, and this is actually, we don't realize how much this is a consequence of a deliberate colonial strategy, in a way, that we have been made to fight each other as if there is no hope of expanding the pie, and the only thing we can do is fight over who gets a share of it. And so the question of equity that you're raising in terms of excellence versus equity, my feeling on the matter is that what we are calling equity does not actually necessarily create an equitable world, nor is there any scientific evidence that those policies actually do so. So one of the questions I ask is, and for somebody who definitely, I am not either trying to deny that there were groups that were oppressed or that there are people who need a hand up, but with all of that, we have to say, if the aim is to end, for instance, discriminations against certain group, or the aim is to have a, some people have said, casteless society, then we should see that the policies that we put in place are actually the ones that are getting us towards that aim, right? There should be scientific evidence that backs that. But I don't know what your view in that is. Are these policies scientifically designed to even achieve the outcomes that they claim to achieve?
Well, I think in latter days, I suppose when the Constitution was written, the very first amendment had to do with Article 15.4, which laid down the reservations policy. Today, I'm not really sure that the oppression, or whatever we call it, was what is being made out today. I think we have been fed a narrative, mostly by the West, people who were determined to see that our young country would never take off right from the beginning. And I believe this started right from the beginning, from the time of independence, when people from outside identified certain fault lines in our social structure and continued to magnify these fault lines. Let it not be forgotten that at the time of the constitution being written, Mr. Ambedkar said that these reservations were going to be for only 10 years. He said by which time the necessary redressal of social inequalities would be achieved and everybody could take the country forward on a level playing field. I think what has happened, and now I do believe that the main motivation for this has come from abroad, that the political parties then began to see an electoral angle to all this in the creation of vote banks. And if this were not bad enough, uh, the Mandal Commission recommendations, they were a disaster because as far as the OBCs were concerned, no clean argument can be made that many of these communities were actually subject to any kind of harassment or discrimination. So, what was true for the SC/ST communities was certainly not true for the OBC. And in this respect, I would say that the adoption of these Mandal Commission recommendations was very, very retrograde because it only magnified the problem. Of course, Mr.
In
Sankrant,
fact, I don't know if you got a chance to read the Mandal Commission report. I
yeah,
actually read
I
that.
have.
Yeah, if you read that report cover to cover, it actually has plain data manipulation. It's firstly the premise is faulty, and even the data it is presented is actually mathematically incorrect. So the
Mm.
report, I can even say was a fraudulent report, and um, I've had it on my long list of things to actually write a complete critique of the problems in the report itself. But it didn't even
Mm.
matter because the report was an old report. They dusted it off, and then they,
I know
for
it was 1979 or something, is it?
yes,
1974
yes,
even.
yes, yes, an old report that they
Very-
dusted off, and they suddenly thrust into this. And as I said, the it's worth contrasting the what China has done, the approach of China versus what India has done. China has the Thousand Talents program, where it
Correct.
has decided to get scientists from all over the world and to give them huge research grants and a lot of freedom to be able to pursue their research. And as a result, that they are now leading technically and scientifically in so many domains. In a recent report, whereas the problem is, as I said, it's not even excellence versus equity. It is that the approach to excellence will lift all boats, but the approach to equity actually, as you said in the beginning, takes everybody down. It doesn't actually lift anybody up in the end of the day.
Yes, in fact, it was Mrs. Thatcher who said that socialism is simply a way of distributing poverty to everybody.
Yes, yes, yes.
And you see, today it's become so retrograde that the present government is perceived, I'm not saying they are like this, by vast sections of the GC, they are perceived to be a government which is actively working against them. Now, as I said, perceptions are important in electoral politics. And today, in the heat of the moment, as we are doing this podcast, the crisis is at a very hot point. And there is definitely a perception that the government is deliberately working against some sections of the public and unnecessarily favoring other sections of the public. This is actually very dangerous because the original scope and idea of these reservations was to have a casteless society and to bring everybody together. Whereas what it has achieved after 25 years, it has kept everybody separate. And today, the whole GC community, which was scattered and kind of diffuse, has now been given a political identity by none other than the government.
Absolutely.
And we have this very weird situation of both the government and the opposition on the same side against vast sections of the people. This is
Absolutely.
not stable, and it is certainly not what would expect in a democracy.
And
Because
the other part
democracy
is,
has to be rule of the people, It cannot be
absolutely.
rule of only some section of the people.
And I think there's twofold problem. Definitely, it's not only that the West pushes it, but I mean, I was reading this Rediff interview with one of the advocates of the petition, which I cite in my article, where she's saying, "Oh, look, all over the world, DEI is happening. The US is pushing DEI. Have you realized the damage that DEI is doing to the universities in the US and the kind of issues that it's creating in terms of academic excellence? And it's a step where the US is going down in pursuing it, and those things are still very mild to what India has done to its education system.
Correct.
And as a somebody who's been a faculty and a professor teaching, one of the questions that really struck my mind was that I can totally understand that if there is a section of society that needs a hands up, that needs better access to education, we should expand access to allow more people to learn. But what uh, kind of policy decision says that you must have faculty selected not on the basis of how best they can teach the students who've come to learn, but on the basis of the criteria of giving underprivileged position in society when they might not be the best people to teach the underprivileged students who are there, right? So it is not something that in any way can achieve excellence in society, nor can it actually help the underprivileged lot, unless you look at it as a very small slice of population getting into some kind of government jobs where the rest of them still languish behind.
Yes, the government jobs, I don't believe, are more than 5%, isn't it, of the total
Yeah,
number
I'm
of
not
people who
sure.
are employed?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much they are, but the problem is that the bigger the government, the more it's actually stopping the people from moving forward in a lot of
Well,
ways.
all the rest of the 95% are paying for the salaries and pensions of this 5%.
Exactly, exactly. And
And
and does it really help that it doesn't help? See, when the vision of Indian society was that it's a cooperative venture, right?
correct.
So when we make it a competitive venture, then it starts to fall apart. And I want to get your feelings, especially on in the area of the faculty and how teaching standards are affected, how research standards are affected when we want to introduce uh, this kind of social engineering in every area.
See, I can tell you only from the point of view of my personal experiences. Uh, After the OBC reservations, let me put it that at the time of the OBC reservations, the number of places for students or faculty from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe communities was very low. It was nowhere near the 22.5% that was prescribed by the Constitution. So there were simply no qualified candidates in those days, and we still went by certain cutoff marks which were sensible, not minus cutoff marks that is happening now. So when the OBC thing happened, however, the classrooms started attracting more number of students, the OBC students. And it was also clear to any clear, straight thinking person that in many cases the quality of these students still needed something to be desired. By about 2000, these initial group of OBC students had completed their PhD and postdoctorals in various places, and they were now searching for jobs in the government institutions. And having sat in several of the selection committees and other committees in those years, around 2000 and so, I would constantly make the case that some of these people who are applying for faculty positions are not up to the earlier standard for whatever reason. And that if these people were going to be made faculty members, they would become professors in 15 years and they would start choosing the new faculty members at that point of time. Mine was a lone voice. Nobody really listened to me. They said, no, this is all going to be okay. We need to bring these people up, and the only way of doing it is to bring them into the system. I don't want to say that I told you so, but every 15 years, which is the duration of a generation, the quality of the faculty members has now descended precipitously in the central institutions, IITs, and today ICERs, and so on. So that a time has come when the faculty is rather poor, the student body is also poor, and if both the faculty and the students are of a quality that is substandard, then there's not much to look forward to in terms of these institutions producing high quality, certainly not internationally competitive SNT work. We can always say this place is okay, that place is okay, this particular individual is okay. And this is certainly true because India is a big country, and so we will have a few institutions, a few departments, or a few individuals who are trying to do something. But by and large, the quality of the faculty in many of the government institutions today leaves a great deal to be desired. They are not okay, and it doesn't look like they're going to be okay in any reasonable period of time because with each generation, the quality keeps falling. It's not going up. And this is actually very distressing. And this is exact opposite of what China did. China was always looking upwards, and we have always been looking downwards. And now it has reached the extreme point when they're saying that anybody who's actually passing the exams with good marks will not be given an opportunity to study. So, what was happening only in Tamil Nadu is now going to happen in the whole country.
Yes,
Tamil Nadu
it's
being an outlier, which was always into this kind of thing right from the very beginning. So the Tamil
absolutely.
Nadu model is now going to be replicated all over the country because today there is a perception that the present government is working actively against the GC students. This is not good because if that is not their real attitude, then how did they allow this perception to build up? That is bad politics from their side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which brings me to another set of the book we are talking about again is Professor Desiraju's book, India, Science, Politics, and Geostrategy. This covers his essays over a period of 30 years in his evolution as as a scientist and a public thinker, public intellectual, writing on a variety of topics. And as he said, the journey began from as a scientist, and in a way, the politics started intruding into the science, if I would say. And so, writing politically also became part of the work. Um, and speaking of which, I know you have a section on the Constitution, something which is also of great interest to me. I'm actually working on a book on that as well,
Nice.
which hopefully should be out shortly. Um, where I'm also taking this factor that Professor Bibek Debroy brought up, which is that uh, I actually did a textual analysis, and more than 90% of the Indian Constitution is a replica of the 1935 edition
1935 Government of India Act.
the
Correct.
Government of India. So more than 90% of it. So it is not that they just took a little bit. Almost the
No,
entire thing is a copy, except that we
correct.
added some little preamble and fundamental rights sections, and you know,
Fundamental rights came from, I think, the Irish Constitution or something.
yeah, that's also copy and pasted from very various things. And the other thing that strikes one is that it's the longest constitution in the world. uh,
Yes,
and and if you look at compare with the American Constitution, which is a
the
very thin
shortest.
document, you know
The
um,
shortest.
and to me, something which is a really long constitution says that we don't trust the people, right? Because
Correct.
if you trust the people, then you don't need to manage and manipulate and have a law about every little aspect of their lives and of every little thing. You can just let the people decide what they want to do as they
The
want.
very fact that it is improperly written and improperly thought out, copy paste, is reflected in the fact that we have had 105 amendments over 75 years, whereas the US Constitution, after 250 years, I think, has only 27 amendments.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely,
it's a very superior, the US Constitution is a very superior document because it basically trusts the people.
absolutely,
So it trusts the people, whereas this is a constitution being a copy paste. It is, and the 1935 Government of India Act being the document of a colonial power ruling over its subjects.
exactly,
So this constitution seems to be actually like a big load on our heads because it doesn't
absolutely.
reflect the essential nature of the Bharatiya people.
Yeah, in
And
fact, the irony is that all the political Indian parties, including I mean, the Congress was the biggest, Indian National Congress was the biggest Indian political force, had said that they had all protested against the 1935 British India Act, calling it a charter of slavery. This is Nehru himself who called it a charter of slavery. And that same act was then essentially imposed on the people of India when that came about. But you know what? So I encourage people to read Professor Desiraju's article on the Constitution. There's a couple of articles in his book, but it really does beg the question, which is that how would we ever get the political will to change it, or are we just got kind of stuck with it?
well, here I will go to sociology and the way in which it is heading, especially through our faulty reservations policy, is that the system will be forced to accept a disruptive change now. I know we Indians have a habitual love of incremental change. And this love of incrementalism, I think, largely arose because we are a very poor country. And in a poor country, people are scared. People are scared of being scared. And I think this love of incrementalism has come from there. But even here, when it goes beyond a point, I am now thinking about the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution. These were not incremental changes. And my prognosis with the present general category crisis is that finally these incrementalist people of this country are being forced to rethink because it is now affecting their daily life. Every person in the GC is not rich enough to send their children abroad to study. It is not physically possible. So when you find that something is now coming into your own home and affecting the future of your own children, then I think the Lakshman Rekha is now has been crossed in some way or the other, which is why I feel that the changes from now on, the next 6 months, Sankrant, are going to determine which way this country is moving, and it is also entering the chaotic regime. And no amount of pampering of the woke or the leftist or the mullah Marxist missionary conglomerate by the American deep state and so on. No amount of that social media stuff is going to help if the anger of, at least, I mean, GC, they say it's about 25% to 30%, maybe slightly more than that. If there is even a moderate degree of unity among the GC community, then every political party will have to be very careful. I
Absolutely.
actually predict even breakup of some of the present political parties, realignments, and maybe going away from the first past the post parliamentary democracy thing, which essentially means scrapping the whole constitution
Yes.
and some kind of a violent change into something that is quite different and probably cannot be anticipated at the present moment. But people tell me that I write books about topics before they actually become popular. And then suddenly, by the time the book appears, the topic has become popular. Now, look at this white book. When we working on this together last year, who
Absolutely.
could have thought that this GC issue is going to come up?
Absolutely.
Who would have really thought that this GC
Absolutely.
issue would come up?
No,
So
it's very, very,
it seems I have a hunch for picking out topics that become popular, and people tell me that I'm quite successful in science because I have done exactly this in science. The topic of weak hydrogen bonds and so on. Recently, I've written in one of these magazines this connection between hydrogen bonding and the BRICS in terms of a multipolar kind of a thing, or many weak interactions being better than one strong interaction. I put a Garuda blog on that also,
uh-huh.
as you will see. So I've
Yes.
also put made a modification of that and put it in one of these places I write. And another article of mine in the same place where you published for CNN 18 is going to come on the Constitution today or tomorrow.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think we're all on the same thing here. And when I was first thinking about a totally new constitution, people told me that I was crazy. This was about 3, 4 years ago. And there was no change. Then India is not a place where change happens so easily. But you can see how fast things have moved now. People are
Absolutely.
actually saying, and they are actually uttering the unutterable. They are even questioning Ambedkar now.
Yeah, but the thing is
They're
that
saying B.N. Rao wrote the constitution. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
people are
He has
saying,
very little to do with it actually.
they may say wild things, but on social media, but it reflects a certain change in the overall mood of the people.
Absolutely. No, I think that's very true. And one of the other essays that really struck me in this book, as I said, this book is just full of many multiple gems. I encourage everybody to get their copy, dive into it, and really engage with the brilliance of Professor Desiraju and the power of the intellect to really look into so many different areas of life. And one of the other ones, which is very related, is, and I think we might have similar views on this, but I hadn't really thought about this other question of reorganizations of states into 75 states. I think it's very interesting. You're using the word smaller states, and my big hobby horse has been a smaller state. Like we don't
Ah,
need the state which
okay.
is encroaching into all of our life all the time.
Correct.
So I
Okay.
want
So you're talking about state with capital S, and I'm talking about state with small s.
Yes, yes,
Very
yes.
nice.
And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of that. I mean, I think if I look at India traditionally, it has never had a large state with the capital S.
Correct.
It never had this kind of encroaching state that would
Hmm.
social engineer us and educate us and do this and that and provide all the jobs. And it's kind of a complete mess from a traditional point of view. And then the second part of it, which is the smaller state, um, as an administrative unit, in my mind, which can return power back to the people, is very compelling. So love to hear what your thought on
Yeah,
75 and 75 is.
the administrative arguments for small states, small s,
Yes.
has always been there.
Mm.
The Panikar Commission of 1956 actually advocated for the bifurcation, I think, in those days of Uttar Pradesh, which is a giant state. But that particular recommendation was never taken up by the government. And Uttar Pradesh, its sheer size, every political party that aspired to power in Delhi has somehow worked their electoral calculations on capturing Uttar Pradesh through whatever mechanism they were able to do. So the Congress did it in one way in the 1950s, and the BJP did it in another way in the 2010 onwards. So, since so much time, effort, and money of this political class has been invested in ways and means how to capture Uttar Pradesh, there is a certain inertia in the political class to even thinking about small states. But today, what has happened, and now I fear with this other crisis about the reservations, the matter of delimitation may actually be put off again because it was going to expire in 2026. But I don't know if the government has either the capability or the capacity to start thinking about delimitation now. Probably what they will do is postpone it for another 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. But that is not solving the problem. But coming back to the small states, our population is, because of the migrations, the representation of our Lok Sabha constituencies is very uneven now. So the number of people in a Lok Sabha constitution varies widely from rather small to very big, which simply means that the value of a vote in each of our constituencies can be widely different. And this goes against Article 14 of our present constitution, which says that every citizen shall be treated equally by the state, capital S. So, in this kind of a scenario, there is an urgent need to delimit the constituencies. That is one issue. The second issue, which we have actually argued in some of the essays in this book, is that such a delimitation can only make sense if all the states of the union are of a comparable size. So we say that there should be two guiding principles: each vote same value and each state same heft. Part of the reason we have this Uttar Pradesh problem is because the influence of this one giant state on the whole country is too much. So if you have a number of small states, roughly of about 2.5 to 3 crore population each, the heft or influence that they have with the central government will be roughly comparable. And so that then within each of these small states, if you have a proper delimitation, then we will come to a situation with about 12 to 13 members of parliament from each small state and a total of about 800, 900 members of parliament in the Lok Sabha, which would be a much more even representation. And again, it's a matter of perception. Each of the states will feel the same. They will not feel that center is favoring one or disfavoring somebody else. And much of the so-called north-south problem will disappear. Because right now there is, we all know what this north-south problem is. Even today I saw in the social media there are many references in this podcast to this GC issue because this is happening right now. Some of the people who are tweeting are saying that we from the northern part of the country will never forget that people from the south are not protesting about the GC business. So this north-south thing keeps coming up again and again, and it is also a very destructive sentiment. Because if you look at the overall concept of Bharat, there is no difference between north and south. And I think by having a number of small states, firstly, the north south problem will disappear. It will hardly be there because the states are all small. And again, we come back to the earlier ideas of Gandhi that small is beautiful, and we've not given enough importance to Panchayat Raj. It's there in an unimportant part of the constitution. But many decisions should end at the Panchayat level. It doesn't have to go much higher than that, because especially in the small villages, there is absolutely no need why something should go even up to a taluka or district level. So again, this is more power to the people, which is the essence of a democracy. So democracy has to run at different levels in a big country. It's a matter of layering our systems. Again, coming back to the idea of Indian knowledge systems and so on. So this is our ancient time-tested way of governance, which is, and I believe small states is the way, because people ask me, yes, you talk, say that India is a civilizational state. How do you administer a civilizational state as opposed to administering a nation state? My answer to this always is that when you have small states, that is the modus operandi.
Hmm.
When the moment you have a small state, you are emphasizing microdiversity. And in this microdiversity, the administration is very simple at a small level, especially because we have an overall civilizational identity, that is the idea of Bharat. That Bharat idea covers all of us, and yet we will revel in our microdiversities to our advantage.
Absolutely. In fact, that whole conflict of unity and diversity is really also a European problem. We've never really had that problem because um,
Quite
because
right.
we, for in fact, I did read your essay on language also because, as you may know, I'm very interested in that topic. I've written a book on that, where this whole linguistic reorganization of the state also is kind of, it's not how India ever worked. I mean, I see all these records where there is so much multilinguality across India
Correct.
and
Correct.
so much exchange of ideas is happening across India. It was never really an issue. Language becomes an issue only after the colonial state.
I mean, personally, I speak four Indian languages. And
Absolutely.
so when people ask me, what is your mother tongue and so on, I said, I don't know what my mother tongue is. I can speak
Mhm.
four Indian languages.
Right, right, right.
So, I mean, language is a means of communication finally. It is not a means of expressing one's identity. And I think Ambedkar put it correctly when he said, one state, one language, but never one language, one state.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he said that in the small states that we have, in each of the small states, you should speak only just one language. But
Yeah,
it
and
doesn't
then
mean that everybody who speaks Kannada should belong to a single state called Karnataka.
yes, 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 and also the fact that, when you have that, then you will also have some of the smaller languages find their own, um, uh, whether
Absolutely.
it's Tulu or whether it's a
Correct.
Bhojpuri or all of those that
Correct.
kind of got
Correct.
got
Even Kodagu, the Kurg language,
yes,
is
yes,
quite different.
absolutely, yes,
Yes, Bhojpuri. In fact, Bhojpuri, Awadhi, and Braj Bhasha. So they're all different. And see what is happening now with this uniform linguistic states is that some of the variations of Hindi are now gradually vanishing. And there is one average Hindi that is now coming out. And this is greatly to the detriment of the rich literature, tradition, and culture of various regions of Uttar Pradesh. Even,
absolutely.
You know?
But what I find is that this movement is actually part of modernization all around the world. Like, for instance, we think that China has, a lot of times when I give a talk on language, they say, no, how can India do it? China only has one language there, but China doesn't have one language. China has 300 languages, right?
Correct,
And so they decided to enshrine one particular dialect as their dialect,
correct,
and because the written script is similar across, that ended up being a unifying force. But But even if you go to Europe or if you go to France, I mean, there are all these different languages or dialects that existed from south of France versus north of France. Or, when I was in Barcelona, I didn't realize that there is their own language that is there, which is different
Correct.
from
Correct.
Catalan. Um,
Catalan.
so,
Catalan is what it's called.
so in Catalonia, they want their own Catalonia, and so that diversity has actually been a feature of all of civilization over time. But in modernization, when you have the mass media, the printing press, all of that, it created a move, and also the state apparatus. It created this move towards homogenization of language. Is
May
how
I
I look at
also
it.
add, may I also add artificial intelligence is going to increase this tendency to average things out.
Yes, but on the other hand, I think the fact that with as the internet has gained, and now it went um, from like in one of my essays I've written there, the printing press was this revolution where everybody could read rather than only
Mm.
some people, and the internet was
Yeah.
a revolution where everybody can write, you know
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
some people. So everybody is now a creator, and now we can come back to having micro communities, smaller
Right.
communities that can interact in their own language, in their own idiom, in their own way. And in some ways, India, the AI, I think, is actually going to help us also overcome the barrier of English, for instance. I think it's
Quite right. Quite right.
where people can learn in their own language much more easily. Mm. So it's a whole smorgasbord of different different topics and
Yes.
ideas, and I wanted to pick one or two more. I think we have to loop back to education again. So even if we leave aside the issue of caste and reservation and all of this, to me, Indian education, even without that, is in somewhat of a crisis. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. My thought is that the whole education system that you and I went through is so disconnected from anything to do with reality. It's almost like an imaginary system of its own, and it's only the rare professor who would actually connect it back to the earth, so to say, or have any relevance to anything that the child sees in their daily life.
I think there we have to put the blame fair and square on Macaulay and
Hmm.
his destruction of our indigenous knowledge systems, something that was bringing us a lot of economic benefits. We became a very rich country doing things in the much older way. And I think the kind of a mental colonization that the Macaulay thing caused, we are still seeing the after effects of that after nearly 200 years. And the craze to go abroad and send one's children abroad, and the kind of inferiority complex that we acquire especially when we see a white skinned foreigner, specifically from America or Western Europe. I think it's still very sad that we are falling prey to that in a country that is really aspiring for something much bigger. And I want to know how long Macaulay's shadow will continue to pervade our education system.
Hmm.
And this also results in a feeling of lesser self worth. So, in the academic community, people will ask, how many papers do you have in Indian journals and how many do you have in foreign journals?
Hmm.
I think this kind of question ought not to even being asked, which means somewhere we feel that our Indian journals are not so good.
It
Otherwise, we
reminds
wouldn't be asking that question.
it
And this
reminds me
is
of
something that you hear often in selection committees and so on. It's not. It's not just
just
casual gossip.
incidental. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it actually it's this. I just remembered this anecdote that really struck me. I was in this was in Peru,
Hmm.
and in Ecuador. In
Hmm.
Ecuador, I had this guide who was taking me around, and he was telling me all about the atrocities that the Spaniards had done, and like how they had cut off the hands of the people who built this magnificent church, and so on and so forth. All these stories were there. And then he talked about the church, and then he said, oh, but there was this miracle here. And I'm not saying it's a miracle, it was actually certified by people who came from Rome, that it was a genuine miracle that happened. uh, so even with all of his angst about the Spaniards and everything, the authority is still, he's very clear, rests with the old continent, to determine what is true and what is not. And I think there's a shadow of that
Is
we
it, you see, is it that we don't trust each other and we feel that we need a white man to come and adjudicate over us?
no we I think we feel that the white science is the real science, and that is the real authority. We have given the adhikar of what is right and what is not, what is true and what is not, outside
No,
to each.
some of these Indians who have lived abroad and so on, some of them have gone on to win big prizes like Nobel Prize and so on. Okay, that's good for them. But after winning the Nobel Prize, then suddenly they get Padma Vibhushan or something. Now, if they were that good, then we should have given them Padma Vibhushan before somebody gave the higher prize.
Absolutely.
After getting the higher prize, we are giving them a lower prize.
Yes, yes.
So, I mean, this if we look at all these things, and then we go one step worse, we claim that some of these people of Indian origin, vaguely, who went abroad and got a Nobel Prize, then we start claiming that they are Indians.
Mm,
I mean, so all this, I think, bespeaks serious inferiority complex.
absolutely.
And then on the other hand, today I find another development that people tend to actually dislike people who can speak grammatical English now.
Mm.
Now, so you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, you want the white man's approval, and on the other hand, you say that, oh, you're talking only in English, you're not talking in an Indian language. So, the
Well,
other day, you might be familiar with this one. Somebody has written about this game theory of Nash,
mm,
and he had
no.
analyzed the predicament of both the Congress and the BJP
Mm,
in how to address this caste matter and used the game theory. I think it was Ashish Dar who gave this small article. And somebody on social media said, oh, Chanakya said all this. Why are you going to John Nash? You should have used Chanakya. So this is the kind of jingoism and xenophobia. So on the one hand, we want their approval. On the other hand, we become xenophobic. A sign of a confused people.
no, my feeling is, coming back to where we started, is that we have lost that quest for excellence. to
Correct.
me to me, the ability to go deep into something, to really like sweat it out, to really understand something. uh, I think that, and in fact, some level the social media makes it even worse, because everything is about a a meme, and how to make some silly thing that goes viral, or something like that. So in in that era, I think, I would also firstly recommend Professor Desiraju's book, because it is in all of the noise. It is something that, as in so many questions, is forcing us to think deeper, even if the answer is not there. It's at least raising a question like, how many states should we have, or is this really our constitution? And I
No,
like the fact.
as a researcher, I'll always say that posing the correct question is the first step. After that,
Absolutely.
you can worry about giving the correct answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with that note, we are out of time, and for the questions to pose and some of the answers, again, I highly recommend Professor Desi Raju's book. The conversation, I'm sure we will continue. Professor Desi Raju, this seems like we've really just touched the surface. So, So we await many more books from you and also many more conversations and podcasts where we can go deeper into this. So thank
Thank
you so
you,
much.
Mr. Sahu. Thank you, Mr. Sahu. And thank you for all the cooperation in bringing out this book and so that we can show it to the general public. And I do hope that my book will provoke them into their own thought journey.
Absolutely. And I'm noticing that the term UGC is right there on the cover of the book.
See,
So
I told you,
very prescient.
I have a way of predicting things.
Yes,
So
yes, absolutely.
yes,
So
UGC is there, DST, science. Well, we've not discussed Pakistan today. There are quite a few essays on Pakistan,
that'll take
but
a
I
whole
think
whole podcast.
we leave that for another date. That's far too interesting a topic. Yes,
No, we'll have to do another one. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And
indeed.
namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much.